friends, my name is Victoria and you're watching Plantastics. Today we're building a T-Rex terrarium. So I have this really cool container and I was inspired by a Reddit post pretty much, and I had some ideas on what to put in here. I had a fern that really wasn't doing that great, especially since we've been running the heat. It's wintertime now, and I really wanted to put it into an enclosure. I have 3 ferns actually, and 2 out of the 3 are doing incredibly well. And I think that's just because of their variety, because I don't make an attempt really to adjust my ambient humidity outside of my office. Now, I do have a humidifier running in my office, and I keep it around 50 to 60% humidity. And like right now, it's at 54% ambient humidity. And my plants seem to do really well in my office, but just throughout my house, once they've become acclimated, like they're okay. But this fern is just not happy. So what I ended up doing was I cut back all of the new growth and I dug it up from its container. And I think I might plant daffodils in that because it's like a really shallow container, and I just got a bunch of bulbs. They were having a sale. They were $1 a bulb, which sounds like a lot for daffodils and paper whites, but they're humongous bulbs, so they are going to produce probably some pretty large flowers. Something that is essential to creating a terrarium is having a false bottom. Why does it matter? Why do you need a false bottom? Why can't I just put the soil straight in there? Well, if you put the soil straight in there, the soil is, the water is going to go down. Gravity is going to make that water go down. And whenever it does, it's going to sit at the bottom and it's going to be constantly touching that soil. So what happens is the soil will begin to rot. Your roots will begin to rot and it will stink and smell putrid. And once you've done that, you pretty much have to deconstruct everything and start over. So it's best pretty much to start things off on the right foot. So what you can do is you can have Lecca as your bottom layer, some type of netting. I'm using screen mesh. And then if you really want to be extra, like me, you can put like Aquarium Gravel in there. So that's what this is. And I have rinsed the gravel and the Lecca. With the Lecca, it's really weird. I don't boil it per se, but I do use a big bowl and I pour boiling water in there multiple times. Why does that matter? I have no idea where this has come from or what could be living in there. And I am kind of like free with getting things from the outdoors simply because I've not had a negative experience. But there could be things in the Lecca simply because I don't know where it's coming from that could harm my plants, or chemicals. So I rinse it, I soak it, I put boiling water on it multiple times, and that's it. The gravel, the aquarium gravel isn't as porous, and I think I just have more trust with it personally. So I basically rinse it. I don't pour boiling water on that. And then what I also put on top of the aquarium gravel is, what are they called? Orchid potting mix. So orchid potting mix is really great because it has got some chunkier stuff. You basically just want to create as much of a barrier as possible to keep the soil from coming in contact directly with the water. And as a rule of thumb, your soil and basically the soil all the way down to the bottom needs to be 1/3 or less of your container. So if you fill your container halfway up with soil, your plants really aren't going to have room to grow. So that's something else to keep in mind. So the orchid mix has bark, it has perlite, and it also has charcoal. So you have even more filtration. This is honestly very much erring on the side of caution. You can also skip the orchid bark and just put a layer of charcoal. None of the local stores in my area have charcoal for terrariums. They have tons of charcoal for grilling, but there are additional chemicals in there. So you just don't want it's not used for horticulture, so you don't want to use it because it's not going to be good for your plants. So I am using my trusty old Marigold Grow soil, and based off of your location, it can be completely different. Like, people have wildly different experiences with Marigold Grow, and it has to be because of the fact that it's different based off of where you live. Because Marigold Grow has never done me wrong, so that's why I continue to use it. So I have multiple barriers between the soil and the water that will collect at the bottom. And of course, if you do end up accidentally overwatering your terrarium, it's not the worst thing if you take the top off and just kind of let it air out. Now, if you let it sit in there and sit in that water, like I said earlier, the soil is going to become putrid, and you're going to really risk root rot and losing your plants. And just basically starting over, which starting over isn't the worst thing, but I don't know if you're like me, but I have times in my life where I have the ability to have time basically for my hobbies, and most of the time I'm just super, super busy working. So whenever I do a project like this, I want to make sure I get it done right, because I likely won't have the ability to correct it for a month or two until I get a nice little lull in working. So here are these cute little spruce seedlings, and I couldn't really figure out where they were coming from because I don't have a spruce in my backyard, and both of my neighbors, they don't either. So I don't know where they came from. I don't know if a bird picked them up or a squirrel. Regardless of where they came from, I have got like 20 of them along the border where my roses are. So I was just so surprised. So I picked up 3 of them because I thought that was going to be so cute. Like, they're literally miniature trees. And of course they will outgrow this, but they have plenty of time. So here is the moss, and they're all very different. Here the T-Rex has like a toupee, and they're different because they came from different spots in my yard. So moss on a oak tree's bark is going to be very different in texture and in its needs than like moss that's on the ground, like underneath a tree or growing on bricks. So, and then if you're lucky enough, you might have liverworts where you live. They live close to a creek at my house where I grew up at, because there were creeks and springs are like literally so cool because it's just a hole in the ground and water is just like coming out all the time. So there were always cool frogs and crawfish and whatnot, and that was a really great time growing up because we would go out and we would get to watch them. And I didn't know this, but they're like, obviously salamanders are like kind of like amphibians, and they eventually get out. But there were these that never got out of water, and they kind of looked like an axolotl, and they were really pretty, and they were brown, and they had these bright red gills, and they were just so precious. So we would go and we would watch them, and they would all hatch out early in the summer. It was like late spring, early summer, and they were just so precious because they were like a centimeter long, and they were just like so cute. So here is a pine cone, basically a baby. Here's some pine bark. So whenever you're going for a walk, most of these things I found after storms, and I basically collect stuff throughout the year because I'm like, I'm not making a terrarium right now, but if I wanted to, I would need certain things. So you can do some preparation that way. Obviously, make sure it's either your property or you have someone's permission. You don't want to be caught poaching things. That's not very cool. So you could also use mosses. They have terrarium kits online, but I literally have so many resources naturally available. So I had these trailing plants and they were just so beautiful. I had, like, in the center, I would have daisies or some very short shrub like zinnias. And then down the sides, I had some creeping jenny, and it was so prolific. Like, I had to trim it pretty consistently, and it was just so beautiful. So, what I have here, this little vine that's like different colors, that is creeping jenny, and it is beautiful in hanging baskets because it almost looks like a jellyfish. They are frost tender, so they're not really living their best life right now. I trimmed several pieces and stuck them in different flower pots throughout my house. They have it pretty often in garden centers, so it's not like I'll lose it forever if it does freeze entirely. But I do enjoy it because it's beautiful, it's green, it's lush, and it has the most petite and tiny flowers. And since the temperature has been changing, they have been changing in color as well. So the plant that I'm holding right now, it is actually a thorn seedling, and they are a pain once they get into your azaleas or camellias or whatever you have that's a bush. Because as you're pruning, you're just, tearing yourself up if you're not wearing long sleeves. So this one actually didn't get thrown into the compost pile only because it has this red leaf and it just looked so unique. So I added it into the terrarium temporarily. All of these plants are going to change back to being green, but right now they've got that fall touch of color, and it's just like a capsule of fall on my desk. As the temperatures change and it gets acclimated to being inside as opposed to outside, they will of course turn back to green and kind of like revert. But for a little while they'll be pretty cool. And I have a lot of creeping jenny on my front porch, so I just tried to pick and clip the most colorful pieces because I wanted that color added in there. I wanted something to contrast the green because so often people make terrariums and everything's green, which is cool, but you can just have so much more fun when you're playing with different colors and different textures. And this is definitely great as an accent because that skull is very obviously the focal point. So these are dried hydrangea blooms, and they just ended up not fitting in with the vibe I was going for. Even though they were dried up, they were just so much of a like an ode to spring that they just didn't fit in with what I was going for. So I added that pine cone in, and really tried to get that creeping jenny to go through that skull there, so that way it looks like, doesn't look like I put it there, but it kind of looks like that it grew through there on its own volition. So here is everything, and I have this pressure sprayer. I actually have two of them, and this is my really small one, and it gets literally every bit of water to the last drop, which is great because this is the one that I use for distilled water only, simply because I have many plants that are very thin-leaved, and the minerals build up in their leaves and cause brown tips. So I have this, and this is safe for them. And I also use it on my terrariums to kind of just get the soil to settle in. So now I've put the top on it and it's complete. Of course, if you're building your own terrarium, nothing's set in stone. You can always play around with things, and if you don't like it, it's okay. You can take things out and add things as you see fit. And if things go really well, you can have little cuttings as you trim when everything gets kind of grown up. So we've got that wood mushroom, very interesting. They actually come in a variety of different colors. If I find a different one, like with patterns, like they have them, I believe they're called turkey mushrooms. And they kind of look like a turkey feather, so they've got different waves of different colors and whatnot. But if I find one of those, it's definitely going to replace this white one, just as some contrast. Hello, thank you so much for watching to the end. I'll see you next time. Be sure to like, subscribe. If you make something similar, tag my Instagram at Plantastics, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.